The electric crack split the air like thunder, followed by a man's anguished cry echoing through the marble corridors of Jefferson County Courthouse. Marcus Thompson's body convulsed as 50,000 volts coursed through him, his wheelchair tipping sideways as his hands clawed helplessly at the leather armrests. The yellow wires trailing from the taser hung in the fluorescent light like deadly party streamers, while a dozen cell phone cameras captured every horrific second of his collapse. "Jesus Christ, what are you doing to him?" shouted Maria Santos, a young attorney who had been walking toward the family court wing when the chaos erupted. Her briefcase clattered to the floor as she rushed forward, but Officer Bradley Reynolds waved her back with his free hand, the other still gripping the smoking taser. "Stay back, ma'am." Suspect was resisting arrest and blocking a public thoroughfare. Reynolds barked, his voice mechanical and rehearsed. Behind him, Karen Whitfield stood with her arms crossed, her courthouse security badge glinting under the harsh lights. Her thin lips were pressed into a satisfied line, as if she had just successfully swatted a particularly persistent fly. Marcus's breath came in ragged gasps as the electrical current finally stopped. His navy suit, carefully pressed that morning for what should have been a routine custody hearing, was now wrinkled and damp with sweat. His dark skin glistened under the courthouse lights, and when he tried to speak, only a hoarse whisper emerged. "I was just waiting for my lawyer. I wasn't blocking anything." 3 hours earlier, Marcus had wheeled through the same courthouse entrance with cautious optimism. At 34, he was a systems analyst for the city's water department, a job he'd held for 8 years, despite the challenges that came with navigating an often inaccessible world. The car accident that had paralyzed him from the waist down at age 23 had initially felt like the end of everything. But Marcus had rebuilt his life with determined grace. He'd earned his master's degree in computer science, bought a house in the suburban neighborhood where he'd grown up, and maintained joint custody of his 7-year-old daughter Emma. Today's hearing was supposed to be routine paperwork, a simple modification to their custody arrangement that would allow Emma to spend more time with him during summer vacation. His ex-wife Sarah had agreed to the change months ago, and their lawyer had assured him it would be a 20-minute formality. Marcus had even planned to take Emma to the zoo afterward, a surprise he'd been looking forward to for weeks. The courthouse's accessibility features were adequate, but dated. The ramps were steep enough to strain his shoulders, and the heavy doors required more force than they should have. But Marcus had learned to navigate these obstacles with patient efficiency. He'd checked in at security, passed through the metal detector without incident, and made his way to the third-floor family court wing, where he was instructed to wait in the hallway outside Judge Morrison's chambers. That's where he encountered Karen Whitfield, a woman whose 20-year career in courthouse security had been marked by an escalating pattern of complaints about her treatment of visitors. Karen was 53 years old, rail-thin, with prematurely gray hair, pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of disapproval. She wore her authority like armor, taking particular pleasure in enforcing rules that existed more in her imagination than in any official handbook. "Excuse me, you can't park that thing there," Karen had said, her nasal voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the corridor. Marcus looked around, confused. The hallway was nearly empty, with only a few other people scattered near various courtroom doors. He was positioned near the wall, well out of the main walking path. "I'm sorry. Park what?" Marcus asked politely, though he already sensed where this conversation was heading. He'd encountered Karen's type before, people who seemed to view his wheelchair as a personal affront to their sense of order. "That wheelchair. You're blocking the hallway. There are designated waiting areas on the first floor." Karen tapped her clipboard against her leg with staccato rhythm, like a metronome counting down to confrontation. Marcus glanced around again. The corridor was easily 15 feet wide, with plenty of room for people to pass on either side of him. "I'm waiting for my custody hearing in Judge Morrison's courtroom. My lawyer told me to wait right here." "I don't care what your lawyer told you. I'm telling you to move. Now." Karen's voice had risen enough that several other people in the hallway turned to look. A young mother with two small children hurried past them, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing tension. "Ma'am, I'm not blocking anything. Look around, there's plenty of space for everyone to walk." Marcus kept his tone measured and calm, drawing on years of experience in situations like this. He'd learned that anger, no matter how justified, only made things worse when dealing with people who already saw him as a problem to be solved. Karen's face flushed red. "Are you arguing with me? Are you refusing to follow a direct order from courthouse security?" She reached for the radio clipped to her belt, her movements sharp and aggressive. "I can call the police right now if you want to make this difficult." "I'm not arguing with anything. I'm just trying to understand why I need to move when I'm not bothering anyone." Marcus could feel the familiar knot of frustration forming in his stomach. The same feeling he got when store clerks followed him around assuming he was shoplifting, or when restaurant hosts tried to seat him in the back corner away from other diners. That's when Karen made the call that would change everything. Without another word of warning, she unclipped her radio and switched to the emergency channel. "This is Security Officer Whitfield at the courthouse. I need police assistance on the 3rd floor immediately. We have an individual refusing to comply with security directives and blocking a public walkway. Subject appears agitated and may be preparing to become violent." The description was so far from reality that Marcus actually laughed, a short bark of disbelief that seemed to infuriate Karen even more. "I'm sitting in my wheelchair. Lady, how exactly am I appearing violent?" "Don't you take that tone with me," Karen snapped, backing away as if Marcus might suddenly leap from his chair and attack her. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I know trouble when I see it." Within minutes, the situation escalated beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. Officer Reynolds arrived with his partner, Officer Janet Mills, both of them responding to Karen's radio call as if they were approaching an armed suspect. Reynolds was a 10-year veteran of the force, with a reputation for quick trigger fingers and quicker tempers. Mills was newer, only 3 years on the job, but she'd already learned to follow her partner's lead without question. "Sir, we need you to move away from this area immediately," Reynolds announced, his hand resting conspicuously on his taser. "You're in violation of courthouse security protocols and creating a public disturbance." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here for a custody hearing. I'm waiting exactly where I was told to wait, and I haven't disturbed anyone." "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Mills added, positioning herself on Marcus's other side. "Just do what Officer Whitfield is asking, and everyone can go about their business." The surreal nature of the situation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here he was, a man who paid his taxes, volunteered at his daughter's school, and had never so much as received a speeding ticket, being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing in a wheelchair. "Can someone please explain to me what law I'm breaking by sitting here?" Reynolds stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Marcus's chair. "Obstruction of justice, failure to comply with lawful orders, and creating a public disturbance. That enough for you?" "Look around you," Marcus's voice cracked with frustration. "There's nobody here. How am I obstructing anything?" That's when Reynolds reached for his taser. The weapon emerged from its holster with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent corridor. "Last warning. Move now, or you're going to be moved." Marcus raised his hands in surrender, the universal gesture of compliance that had become second nature to any person of color in America. "Please don't do this. I'll move wherever you want me to move. Just don't hurt me." But Karen Whitfield had worked herself into a righteous fury. "He's been threatening me since I asked him to move. He's aggressive and non-compliant. Do what you have to do. Officer." The lie was so blatant, so obviously contradicted by Marcus's posture of surrender, that several witnesses actually gasped. Maria Santos had arrived just in time to hear Karen's false accusation, and she immediately began recording with her phone. "That's not what happened," she called out. "I was watching the whole thing. He never threatened anyone." "Ma'am, put that phone away and step back," Reynolds barked. But Maria kept recording. She'd seen too many cases of police misconduct go unpunished because there was no video evidence. She wasn't going to let that happen here. What happened next would be replayed on news channels across the country within hours, without any further warning, without any attempt at de-escalation. Reynolds raised his taser and fired. The barbs struck Marcus in the chest and stomach, sending him into immediate convulsions. His wheelchair tipped sideways as his body went rigid, and he crashed to the floor with a sickening thud that echoed through the marble corridor. The aftermath was chaos. Maria Santos kept filming as she screamed for someone to call an ambulance. A court clerk came running from Judge Morrison's chambers, demanding to know what was happening. Other witnesses pulled out their phones, creating a ring of cameras around the fallen man. Karen Whitfield stood in the center of it all, still clutching her clipboard, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. "Suspect has been neutralized," Reynolds reported into his radio, as if he'd just apprehended an armed terrorist rather than tasing an unarmed man in a wheelchair. "We'll need transport for one in custody." Marcus lay on the cold marble floor, his body still twitching from the electrical shock. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the ground, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. "My daughter," he whispered when he could finally speak. "I was supposed to pick up my daughter." The video footage that Maria Santos captured would become the catalyst for everything that followed. She uploaded it to social media before the police could confiscate her phone, and within hours it had been viewed thousands of times. The caption she wrote was simple, but devastating. "Peaceful man in wheelchair, tased by police for blocking empty courthouse hallway. Where is the justice?" Local news stations picked up the story by evening, and by the next morning it had gone national. The footage showed everything: Karen's false report, the empty hallway, Marcus's compliance and surrender, and the completely unnecessary use of force that followed. Legal experts appeared on talk shows to discuss the obvious civil rights violations, while disability advocates organized protests outside the courthouse. But the real bombshell came 3 days later, when the courthouse's own security cameras told a story that completely contradicted Karen Whitfield's account. The internal footage, released only after intense pressure from civil rights lawyers and local media, showed the entire incident from multiple angles. It was crystal clear that Marcus had never threatened anyone, never raised his voice until after the police arrived, and had been positioned well out of the main walkway the entire time. More damaging still was the audio, which captured Karen's radio call in its entirety. The difference between her breathless emergency report of an agitated and potentially violent suspect and the reality of a man quietly waiting for his lawyer was so stark that even police union representatives struggled to defend the officer's actions. The courthouse security cameras also revealed something else that would prove crucial in the investigation that followed. The timestamp on the footage showed that in the 30 minutes before Karen confronted Marcus, exactly 4 people had walked through that section of hallway. Not one of them had been impeded or inconvenienced by his presence. The obstruction existed only in Karen Whitfield's mind. As the story gained national attention, more details about Karen's history began to emerge. Records requests revealed a pattern of complaints dating back years, almost exclusively involving people with disabilities, minorities, or anyone else Karen deemed undesirable for the courthouse's gleaming marble halls. She'd forced a blind woman to remove her guide dog from the building, claiming it was unsanitary. She'd called security on a Spanish-speaking family because they were loitering suspiciously while actually waiting to be called for their immigration hearing. She'd even reported a veteran with a prosthetic leg for bringing weapons into the courthouse. In each case, Karen's supervisors had dismissed the complaints as misunderstandings or communication issues. She'd received sensitivity training twice, but no real disciplinary action had ever been taken. The courthouse administration had chosen to ignore the growing pattern of discrimination, hoping the problems would resolve themselves or that complaining parties would simply give up and go away. That changed when Marcus's story exploded into the national consciousness. Suddenly, courthouse officials found themselves facing federal civil rights investigations, disability rights lawsuits, and a media firestorm that showed no signs of dying down. The mayor called for a complete review of courthouse policies. The police chief was forced to defend his officers' actions at increasingly hostile press conferences. And Karen Whitfield found herself suspended pending investigation, her 20-year career hanging by a thread. The first major protest took place on a sweltering Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Marcus was tased. Disability rights activists, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens who had been outraged by the video footage gathered on the courthouse steps. The crowd was diverse and passionate, united by their anger at what they'd witnessed and their determination to prevent it from happening again. Marcus himself appeared at the protest, still bearing visible bruises from his fall, but determined to speak out. He'd spent the week consulting with lawyers, giving interviews to reporters, and trying to explain to his daughter why Daddy had been hurt by police officers. Emma, with the heartbreaking directness of childhood, had asked if the officers didn't like Daddy because he used a wheelchair. The question had shattered something inside Marcus, but it had also strengthened his resolve to fight back. "I didn't choose to become the face of this movement," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza. "I was just a father trying to spend more time with his daughter. But if what happened to me can prevent it from happening to someone else, then maybe some good can come from this nightmare." The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. For too long, people like Karen Whitfield have been allowed to hide their prejudices behind badges and uniforms. They've convinced themselves that their personal discomfort with disability, with difference, is somehow a legitimate law enforcement concern. It's not. It's discrimination, plain and simple, and it has to stop. Inside the courthouse, Karen Whitfield watched the protest from a third-floor window, her face pale and drawn. She'd lost weight since the incident, stress eating away at her like acid. The woman who had once patrolled the courthouse halls with absolute authority now jumped at every sound, paranoid that everyone was watching her, judging her, waiting for her to make another mistake. Her lawyer, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, had advised her to stay quiet and let the furor die down. But Karen couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about the incident. In her mind, she'd been doing her job, maintaining order and security in a public building. The fact that Marcus had been hurt was unfortunate, but it was his own fault for not following instructions. "They're making me into some kind of monster," she complained to her husband that evening, stabbing at her dinner with unusual violence. "I was just trying to keep the hallways clear. What if there had been an emergency? What if people couldn't get through because of that wheelchair?" Her husband, A mild-mannered accountant, who had long ago learned to nod and agree with Karen's increasingly paranoid worldview, made appropriately sympathetic noises. But even he was beginning to have doubts. The video footage had been impossible to ignore, and seeing his wife's actions from an outside perspective had been uncomfortable and enlightening. Meanwhile, the investigation into the incident was revealing a culture of discrimination that went far deeper than one rogue security officer. Federal investigators interviewing courthouse staff uncovered story after story of inappropriate behavior, from security guards who routinely harassed people with service animals to clerks who made disparaging comments about disability benefits recipients. The courthouse, which was supposed to be a symbol of equal justice under law, had become a hostile environment for anyone who didn't fit a narrow definition of normal. The most damaging revelations came from former courthouse employees who had witnessed Karen's behavior over the years, but had been afraid to speak up. A retired clerk named Dorothy Williams testified that she had personally seen Karen make at least a dozen false reports about disabled visitors, always claiming they were security threats or public disturbances, when they were simply trying to access the services they were legally entitled to. She had this way of describing people that made them sound dangerous. Dorothy explained to investigators, "A man with cerebral palsy, who spoke with difficulty, became agitated and incoherent. A woman with autism, who avoided eye contact, was evasive and suspicious. She turned normal human differences into law enforcement problems." The investigation also revealed that Karen's supervisors had known about her pattern of complaints, but had chosen to ignore them rather than deal with the uncomfortable questions they raised. Disability discrimination was something that happened in other places, other institutions, not in their courthouse, not in their respectable, well-run facility. This willful blindness extended all the way to the top of the courthouse hierarchy. Judge Morrison, the family court judge who should have been overseeing Marcus's custody hearing when he was tased, admitted that he had never questioned why certain types of people seemed to have so many behavior problems in the courthouse. It had been easier to assume that Karen was doing her job professionally than to examine whether her job, as she understood it, was inherently discriminatory. As the weeks passed and the investigation deepened, public pressure for accountability continued to mount. Marcus's civil rights lawsuit was joined by a federal class action suit representing dozens of other courthouse visitors who had been mistreated by Karen and other security personnel over the years. The Department of Justice opened its own investigation into whether the courthouse's policies violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. The breaking point came during a packed city council meeting in late September. The council chambers were filled beyond capacity with disability rights activists, concerned citizens, and members of the press. Karen Whitfield, who had initially tried to avoid public scrutiny, was forced to appear and answer questions about her conduct. The confrontation was devastating. Video clips of Marcus's tasing were played on large screens, while Karen sat rigid in her chair, her lawyer whispering urgent advice in her ear. Witness after witness testified about her pattern of discriminatory behavior, painting a picture of a woman who had used her badge to terrorize people whose only crime was being different. "Mrs. Whitfield," asked Council Member James Thompson, Marcus's cousin and a longtime advocate for disability rights, "do you believe that Mr. Marcus Thompson posed any actual threat to courthouse security on the day he was tased?" Karen's answer would become the final nail in her professional coffin. Instead of expressing remorse or acknowledging her mistakes, she doubled down on her original position. People in wheelchairs can be just as dangerous as anyone else. They can hide weapons. They can cause disruptions. My job was to maintain order, and that's what I did. The response sent shockwaves through the packed chamber. Even Karen's own lawyer looked stunned by her complete failure to show any understanding of how inappropriate her actions had been. Councilmember Thompson pressed further. So you're saying that being in a wheelchair automatically makes someone a security threat? I'm saying that I have to treat everyone equally, Karen replied, apparently oblivious to the irony of her statement. I can't give special treatment just because someone is disabled. It was a masterclass in missing the point. Equal treatment would have meant leaving Marcus alone to wait quietly for his hearing, just like any other courthouse visitor. Instead, Karen had subjected him to harassment and violence based solely on her prejudices about what a disabled person should look like in a public space. The City Council voted unanimously to recommend Karen's termination and to overhaul the courthouse's security policies from top to bottom. The police chief announced that Officer Reynolds would face internal disciplinary action and mandatory retraining. Officer Mills, who had largely followed Reynolds' lead, would receive additional de-escalation training, but would not face suspension. But the most significant changes went beyond individual accountability. The courthouse administration was forced to implement comprehensive disability awareness training for all staff, create clear protocols for interacting with disabled visitors, and establish an independent ombudsman's office to investigate discrimination complaints. Marcus's civil lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed but substantial sum, money that he used to establish a scholarship fund for disabled students pursuing careers in public service. The settlement also included a requirement that Marcus be consulted on the courthouse's new accessibility policies, giving him a direct voice in preventing future incidents. Karen Whitfield was formally terminated 3 weeks after the City Council meeting. Her dismissal letter cited pattern of discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and failure to uphold constitutional principles of equal treatment. She would never work in law enforcement again. On a crisp October morning, almost 3 months after the incident that had changed his life, Marcus wheeled through the courthouse entrance once again. This time, he was there not as a victim, but as a consultant, helping to train the new security staff on proper procedures for interacting with disabled visitors. The changes were immediately visible. Accessibility signage was clearer and more prominent. Staff members had been trained to offer assistance without being condescending or intrusive. Most importantly, the culture of casual discrimination that had flourished under Karen Whitfield's reign had been replaced by an atmosphere of genuine respect for all courthouse visitors. Marcus's custody case had been resolved weeks earlier, with Judge Morrison personally apologizing for the trauma Marcus and his daughter had endured. Emma would indeed be spending more time with her father, and the extra custody time had given them opportunities to talk about what had happened and what it meant. "Daddy, are the police still mean to people in wheelchairs?" Emma had asked during one of their conversations. "Some of them still don't understand how to treat people fairly," Marcus had replied carefully. "But we're working to teach them. And there are lots of good police officers who do the right thing." It was a complicated answer for a 7-year-old, but Emma seemed to understand. "Like how you taught my teacher about your wheelchair." Marcus smiled at the memory. Earlier that year, Emma's teacher had awkwardly tried to speak to him by bending down to his eye level, as if his wheelchair somehow affected his hearing. Marcus had gently explained that he could hear and see just fine from his normal position, and the teacher had never made that mistake again. "Exactly like that, sweetheart. Sometimes people just need to learn." The training session at the courthouse went smoothly. Marcus found himself facing a room full of security officers and administrative staff, all of them clearly uncomfortable with the reason for their mandatory attendance. But as he talked about his experience and about the broader issues facing disabled people in public spaces, he could see understanding beginning to dawn in their faces. "I want to be clear about something," Marcus said, near the end of his presentation. "I don't believe that most discrimination comes from malicious intent. Usually, it comes from ignorance, from not thinking about how your actions affect other people." Karen Whitfield probably thought she was doing her job correctly, but impact matters more than intent, and the impact of her actions was devastating. One of the new security officers, a young woman named Patricia Collins, raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson, how do we make sure we don't make the same mistakes? How do we know if we're being discriminatory without realizing it?" It was exactly the right question, and Marcus smiled as he answered. "Start by assuming that people know what they need better than you do. If someone says they don't need help, believe them. If someone is following the rules and not bothering anyone, leave them alone. And most importantly, remember that being different isn't the same as being dangerous." After the training session, Marcus spent some time in the same third-floor hallway where he'd been tased months earlier. The space looked the same marble floors, same fluorescent lights, same wide corridor that had never actually been blocked by his presence. But the atmosphere felt completely different. Instead of hostility and suspicion, there was now a sense of genuine welcome for all visitors. Maria Santos, the lawyer who had filmed the incident, stopped by to check on him. She had become something of a local celebrity after her video went viral, and she'd used her newfound platform to advocate for criminal justice reform and disability rights. "Any regrets about getting involved?" Marcus asked her as they stood in the hallway where it all began. Maria shook her head firmly. "The only regret I have is that I didn't get there sooner to prevent what happened to you. But I'm glad I was able to document it. Without that video, Karen would probably still be harassing people, and you'd be facing criminal charges for assaulting a police officer." It was a sobering reminder of how easily the situation could have gone differently. Without video evidence, without witnesses willing to speak up, without media attention that forced accountability, Marcus could have ended up in jail while Karen Whitfield continued her pattern of discrimination unchecked. 6 months later, Marcus was invited to speak at the annual conference of the National Association of Courthouse Security. His presentation, titled "Equality Under Law Making Justice Accessible to All," was standing room only. He spoke about his experience, about the changes that had been implemented at Jefferson County Courthouse, and about the ongoing need for vigilance against discrimination in all its forms. Justice isn't just about what happens in the courtroom, he told the audience of security professionals from across the country. It starts the moment someone enters your building. If they're made to feel unwelcome, if they're treated with suspicion or hostility because of who they are or what they look like, then justice has already failed them. The speech was met with sustained applause, and afterward, Marcus was approached by dozens of security officers wanting to learn more about creating inclusive environments. Many of them shared their own stories about times they had made mistakes or witnessed discrimination, and their genuine desire to do better gave Marcus hope for continued progress. Karen Whitfield, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from public view. After losing her job at the courthouse, she'd struggled to find other employment. The viral video of her false police report had made her unhireable in any position requiring public trust. She'd moved to a small town 2 states away, where she worked part-time at a grocery store and tried to rebuild her life away from the spotlight. In her quieter moments, when the anger and defensiveness subsided, Karen sometimes found herself wondering if she really had been wrong. The certainty that had once defined her worldview had been shattered by the universal condemnation of her actions. For the first time in years, she was forced to question whether her approach to security had actually made anyone safer, or whether it had simply made her feel more powerful. The answer when she was honest with herself, was deeply uncomfortable. But it was also the first step toward whatever redemption might still be possible for her. As for Marcus, he continued his work as a systems analyst, while also serving on disability rights boards and speaking at conferences around the country. Emma thrived in their expanded custody arrangement, and their relationship grew stronger through their shared experience of adversity and recovery. The courthouse incident had changed Marcus in ways both subtle and profound. The trauma would always be with him, but so would the knowledge that his suffering had led to meaningful change. Dozens of courthouses across the country had reformed their policies after hearing about his case. Hundreds of security officers had received training on disability awareness and de-escalation techniques, and countless disabled people would be treated with dignity and respect because of the accountability that his case had demanded. On the first anniversary of the incident, Marcus returned to Jefferson County Courthouse one final time. This time, he brought Emma with him, and together, they walked through the halls that had once been the site of such injustice. The little girl marveled at the marble columns and the high ceilings, while her father pointed out the accessibility features that had been improved in the wake of his experience. "This is where it happened, isn't it, Daddy?" Emma asked when they reached the third-floor hallway. "Yes, sweetheart. This is where a very confused lady called the police on Daddy for no good reason." Emma looked around the wide, empty corridor, then up at her father with the piercing logic of childhood. "But there's so much room here. Why did she think you were in the way?" Marcus knelt down so he was at his daughter's eye level, his heart swelling with love and pride at her question. "Sometimes, Emma, people see problems that aren't really there because they're afraid of things they don't understand." The lady wasn't really worried about the hallway being blocked. She was uncomfortable seeing Daddy in his wheelchair, and she let that discomfort make her do something very wrong. "That's silly," Emma declared with the devastating honesty of a child. "Your wheelchair doesn't hurt anybody." "No, it doesn't. And now lots more people understand that, thanks to what happened here." As they prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look around the hallway where his life had been forever changed. The physical space was the same, but everything else had been transformed. Fear and prejudice had been replaced by understanding and respect. A culture of discrimination had been dismantled and rebuilt on principles of equality and dignity. It hadn't been easy, and the progress was far from complete. There would always be more Karen Whitfields out there, more opportunities for prejudice to masquerade as public safety, more battles to fight for true equality under the law. But the victory here at Jefferson County Courthouse proved that change was possible when good people refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. Marcus wheeled toward the elevator with Emma skipping beside him, both of them ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind them, the courthouse hummed with the quiet activity of justice being served, not perfect justice, perhaps, but justice that was more equal, more accessible, and more worthy of the ideals it claimed to represent. And in the end, that progress was worth every moment of the pain it had taken to achieve it.